Welcome to another exciting episode of Explain of Thrones, the podcast that used to be all about the TV show HBO's Game of Thrones, is now all about the books A Song of Ice and Fire. We're going to be talking deep about the mysteries, the different characters, the fan theories, and all the other exciting things that you miss by only watching the show. Today, I have some very good friends on the line. I have Mr. Ross Riley.
How's it going?
I have Ms. Robin Cabana.
Hey, guys.
And Ms. Dinez Yegan.
Hello.
So, you guys, you all know that this episode is going to be all about R+L=J, the famous fan theory. And before I get into it, I wanted to talk just a little bit about kind of our goals for this podcast and what we're going to be doing here. Now that the show's over, obviously we can't be going through the show over and over again. So we're going to be talking about the different elements of the books and kind of examining. I'm not much of a fan theorist myself. I don't really have creative new ideas, but I do just love the stories and all the different aspects to it, and I love the puzzle pieces. So that's really what we're going to be doing. We're going to be examining the different puzzle pieces and seeing if we can't maybe put our heads together and come up with something new and exciting. But yeah, so we're not really going to be going back over how the show has treated things because, you know, they've come out and just sort of solved, especially R+L=J for us. And I don't want to spend the whole podcast bashing the show anymore. So having said that, let's bash the show.
Never.
I do, though. I want to start, since this is one that is very closely tied to, this topic is one very tied to the past season, talk about what they did with R+L=J and how I didn't really like it very much. Before I start going, though, why don't you guys say a little bit about what you thought of the TV show's handling of R+L=J? Who wants to go first?
Ross, I feel like you probably have a very impassioned speech.
I really didn't like it, and especially, from what I can remember, the first person to find out about it was Sam.
You didn't?
I didn't. I didn't like the whole thing with, Sam being, the way he found out about it.
Yeah.
It was just so out of the blue, out of all the thousands and thousands of books, or maybe even a million books that were there, she found the one journal from the maester who was taking care of it, who hinted at it, and the information didn't even fully come out in the scene. It was teased to us that it was going to be found out, and then he interrupts it, Sam interrupts for Gilly's explanation of it.
And it seemed like Sam didn't listen to her at all when she was saying it.
Exactly.
But then he's back with Bran and he remembers exactly what she said.
Yeah, so it just seemed very half-baked. They're like, oh, we need to put this in this season before, they start doing it to make it incest, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Dinez, what'd you think?
Well, being the one that did not read all the books and only knew about R+L=J because of you, Mike.
Thank you.
I found it, as I was watching the show and as I was getting to know everything, the R+L=J thing had to be the case, right? In my opinion, because of Ned Stark. And at the end of the day, the way it was revealed, I think, was, a little cheesy, granted that they, solidified it, whilst having sex.
Yeah. That was kind of weird.
Well, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt of sensationalism and it being TV and stuff, and they have to make things that, I mean, they don't have to, but I get why they do things to make people of certain shades of happy.
Yeah.
So I'm not mad about it. I found it satisfying to know, but I feel like it could have been done with a tiny bit more tact.
Yeah. Yeah. Robin, you go ahead.
Well, I agree with Ross that, you know, the whole convenience thing that Sam all of a sudden, you know, remembered what Gilly was talking about and somehow must have read that scroll while he was driving his wagon up north. But the other aspect that was just a little weird to me was that Bran knows everything, but he didn't put the whole story together. Like, he was missing, you know, he saw all the events of the Tower of Joy, but he didn't see the annulment/wedding part of it, I guess.
Right.
And it's a little too convenient that he didn't see that, I think, too. Like, because they had to make it this weird conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know. It didn't have a lot of nuance, I thought. They just kind of slapped it all together.
Yeah.
And the big reveal. Because I think when they did show Bran last season, right? Was that last season?
Yeah, last season
cool.
he saw the
That was
Tower
a
of
cool
Joy.
reveal.
I agree. I really like
Yeah.
that as a way of telling us what was originally a flashback from Ned that they didn't tell us.
Exactly. And then, I was trying to remember where in the books that happened at all, and it was cool to see that scene, you know, taking place. So
Yeah.
but you know, they left out a little bit in Bran's exploration of the past there. It's just a little too convenient.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
and kind of the bigger thing, Dinez, going back to what you were saying, they didn't really do a good enough job of telling the audience this is a mystery for you to figure out.
True, totally. I agree. I didn't see that coming until you explained it to me, and then I was like, oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Like, didn't I tell you a couple of seasons back
Yeah.
when it was Stannis offhand says something to he's talking to his wife, and you know his wife being a major bitch is like, you know, oh, Jon Snow the bastard, blah blah blah, and Stannis just kind of says like, you know, that wasn't Ned Stark's way. That's really the only even hint that they gave of it.
Totally. It was long before the Tower of Joy you told me that theory. So when I saw the Tower of Joy, that was when it got solidified for me, obviously. But yeah, to your point, there were no breadcrumbs really leading up to that.
Exactly. And that's really the crux of the matter of the difference in the books and the show. The books have led you here with so many breadcrumbs. It's kind of amazing how much. But for the people out there who are listening who do follow Game of Thrones fan theories, it's almost as if R plus L equals J is taken as fact, you know? And sure, the show has now stated it outright, but what I find so interesting in the books as opposed to the show is it's really not as set in stone as people seem to want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there really are still other options. But it's also kind of the Game of Thrones fan theory. Like, of all of the different fan theories, there's so many bizarre ones and stupid ones and really cool ones, but I feel like it's kind of the one that started it all, because I think I remember reading somewhere there was like a message board back in 1996, you know?
I have the date here as September 18th, 1997. I was doing some research on this. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, so there you go. So that's so long ago.
A Usenet group, which, you know, back on dial-up probably.
Yeah, remember Usenet?
Oh my gosh, this stuff is just old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like So that was 97. So the only book that was out was the first book.
Okay. Was it okay?
So this person who came up with it back in 97 had only the first book to go on. And kind of real quick, I just want to say all fan theories, I feel, kind of fit into different categories. There's like the bottom shelf fan theories, which are like your, Drogo and Daenerys made Tyrion theory. Have you guys heard that one?
Oh, I don't want to hear that one.
Yeah.
It's bottom of the barrel. There's also like Varys is a mermaid secretly.
Or that Theon is the
Azor Ahai.
The Neo.
Yeah, Theon is Azor Ahai. Yeah, exactly. Like there's some really stupid ones. Then there's your kind of like middle tier theories that they're, to me, in my mind, they're either middle tier because they're super bizarre, but there is evidence that could make them possible, or they're middle tier because it makes sense, but it's not that interesting. That's where I would put, like, say, the bolt-on theory. Have you guys heard that one?
No.
It's the idea that Roose Bolton is actually a centuries-old skin-stealing vampire.
Oh, jeez.
But, like,
People
that one...
need hobbies.
Well, and this is one for a lot of people.
Oh, my goodness.
But, yeah, so there's that one, and then, that's also where I would maybe put, like, the High Septon, or the High Sparrow is actually Howland Reed. There's a lot of theories in that kind of, like, middle ground. But then I feel like R+L=J is, like, a top shelf theory. It's like... There's so
all
many...
signs point to go.
Right, exactly. All signs point to it. But I also feel like that's one of the things that makes it so not telegraphed, but so out there that it may actually not be true. It may be a red herring.
It would be funny if George is the one who started this.
Yeah.
Well,
No, go ahead.
I found this article I was reading. The guy who his name was Roderick Sue on these message boards, and nobody can figure out who he was. They've never heard from him again. And he posted a list of theories and unanswered questions from Game of Thrones. So I guess from the first book on this thing. And I don't know what the first questions were, because number 4 is his theory about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and then number 5 is on the list is if Jon Snow is a Targaryen by tradition, he is most likely to make Daenerys.
Wow.
And that goes back to 97.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be crazy if George planted that?
He put that in there. I mean, he was, he's been a nerd his whole life, so he was probably one of the first people on the internet.
So maybe he planted it as a red herring, or maybe he planted it as just a,
well,
a bone, man, who'd really take. 1997 is before I got my first AOL screen name, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's so funny.
Yeah. So, and also this kind of plays into the issue of how much outside of the book's influence should we take into account of fan theories? Because famously, when the two show writers, D&D, went to George Martin and said they wanted to adapt it to TV show, his only question for them was, who is Jon Snow's mother? And I seriously feel like they couldn't have come up with any other name than Lyanna Stark. Like, I cannot foresee them saying another name. But that's not really conclusive evidence, because maybe George was like, okay, they got to level 1, which is where I want it to be. But I've actually got these other levels.
You see, I remember an interview they had with George Martin, and he was even saying, like, back after the first book, like, interviewer asked him, it's like, do you go online and read the fan theories and sometimes change your story to, like, be like, oh, they already got it, so I gotta change it? And he's like, back when the first book came out, I did that, and I thought about changing it, but I'm like, but he was like, but I left those clues there for a reason, for the people, like the 1% who could actually figured it out on their own, to, like, maybe they get it eventually and get that payoff eventually.
Oh.
But, yeah, and it's just like, he's like, also, it just wouldn't make sense a lot of ways. Like, I plan things, and I set all these things up, and it would just be kind of just, I guess false red herrings. Like, there are definitely going to be some of those, but, like, there are key things he wanted to happen. And he's like, I just can't change that. So without the theory's not making sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
I could absolutely see that being the case. And that's kind of why this is all so much fun, is because he really does seem to put this much thought into it. Like, a lot of people, when I get into, like, a really deep theory, are like, oh, come on. Do you really think that he was considering, this eye color to be noticed? And yeah, I do think he was expecting that, because, like, there are so many crazy details. Like, for example, you can figure out from only the first book that Lysa is the one that poisoned John Aaron. Like, the clues are in there, but they don't even reveal that until the third book.
No, absolutely. And it's just, I think in general, people underestimate writers, like, for planning. Like, if you've ever read any of Brandon Sanderson's work, he is just as masterful as George Martin for leaving little breadcrumbs that 2 books later, you'll be, like, smacking your head, being like, how didn't I see that?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's great.
And it's like, that could be a coincidence. He said it right there. And it's just in plain sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, Harry Potter's filled with things like that, too, though. If you go back and reread them, there's all these little, like, the mention of Sirius's black motorcycle in that first chapter. Like, things come back that were planted early on. So, yeah, it definitely is a thing writers do, I think.
Yeah, totally.
And I don't think they're going to rewrite their whole book based on a bunch of dummies on the internet.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, real quickly, though, before we dive all the way into it, I didn't get to give my little spiel on how the show handled it. I really did not like the way they brushed it over, as you guys were saying, because they said that the High Septon annulled Rhaegar's marriage to Elia of Dorne. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, that's such a quick line of dialogue that, like, I could see the two of them typing out and just being like, we're done, move on. But it's like, that would never happen in the world of Ice and Fire. Like, the Red Wedding happened because of a broken betrothal. Rhaegar and Elia's marriage was the foundation of the alliance between the Targaryens and the Dornish. Like, also, they had been married for years and had 2 children together already. So, like, you can't just annul a royal marriage just out of the blue like that.
They could. I mean, popes used to do that stuff, I think, all the time back in, like, look at Henry VIII.
But that's exactly it. The Pope didn't annul the marriage.
No, he didn't.
That's why they broke up with the church, the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. So what I mean is, like, the monarchs got what they wanted, is kind of what I mean. And Rhaegar was he's the heir to the throne, so he could do whatever he wanted.
Well, but I'm saying it's really stupid to be in line with the the story as we've understood it so far. And they only added the annulment aspect because they wanted to make it very clear Jon is a legitimate Targaryen and is actually next in line to the throne if there were a Targaryen restoration and not Daenerys. But that's really no fun because the whole point is that, like, succession is a messy affair. You know, all these things can happen, and they threw in the annulled marriage to kind of make it very clear cut. Also,
you know, one thing I'll say that I do, like, I do agree, the annulment is a little sloppily done and added in. But one thing I do like about it that it does keep in kind of theme of the series is that, you know, there's a big difference between, you know, actual love and feelings and a political marriage.
Absolutely.
And people trying to fight it so much, fighting these political marriages, and it, like so many true love romances, ending so poorly because of it.
No,
and just like, you know,
I think you've just like really hit on an important aspect here is that in the world of Ice and Fire and also our medieval world, marriages of royalty were political. They were never for love. So, you know, the idea that Rhaegar could just go to the High Septon and be like, hey, I really like this girl. Can you annul my marriage so that I can marry her for love? It's like, it makes no sense whatsoever. And also, to cap that off, the point you just brought up, they got married in secret? Like, the whole point of securing a rightful heir is that it's a publicly recognized marriage union. You know, that's why we say, should anyone object, speak now or forever hold your peace.
True.
Like, everything about it makes no sense. And they got married under the Faith of the Seven, but Lyanna follows the old gods. And they're defying the tenets of the Faith of the Seven by doing this. So, it's so bum rushed.
yeah. And I would say one thing that's also, I know a lot of people are like, oh, but that brought the Targaryens and the Starks to death. Like, the Starks were under the Targaryens' rule for hundreds of years at this point.
Right.
Sure, it was a little reluctant, but they were, you know, once they bent the knee, the Starks are loyal to a fault. There is no reason for them to marry a Stark.
Exactly.
It was just like, what's his name? The Mad King told, not Tyrion, Tywin Lannister. Tywin wanted to be like a marriage into the Targaryen line.
Yeah,
like,
he wanted Cersei to marry Rhaegar, yeah.
Why would I do that? So it didn't make any political sense, like, in any way for a Stark and Targaryen to marry.
Well,
they needed Dorne. The Dornes was like an expansion, like a big one. So,
and it was a huge slap into the face to the Dornish as well. And then
who are notoriously proud.
Yeah. And then even more stupid stuff that happened in that little set of dialogue while there's an incestuous sex scene going on. Bran says that Robert's rebellion was based on a lie, but it wasn't based on a lie. Like, most people thought that Rhaegar was in love with Lyanna and that's why they ran off. It was really only Robert who, you know, was convinced that this was a rape and kidnapping. In fact, in the books, like, on, like, the third chapter of Daenerys, very first chapter in the book, she says that, like, Rhaegar died on the Trident for the woman he loved. Like, this isn't a big mistruth in the world. Like, a lot of people thought that it wasn't so much about was Lyanna raped and kidnapped or did she go willingly? It was about the fact that Rhaegar took her away from her set betrothal to Robert Baratheon. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no matter what, like, that's still a slap in the face to Robert Baratheon. Like,
yeah.
You know, whether she was in love with this other guy or not. And yeah, so.
Exactly.
For his honor, he would still have to go after her, like, no matter what. Yeah.
Right.
You know.
And again, I'll tie it back to, like, that's what the Red Wedding was all about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody was like, oh, well, Rob and Talisa or Jane in the books, they're in love, so whatever. That's okay that they're not going to marry the Freys. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you know, this is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then last stupid thing in there, that John's real name is Aegon, but Rhaegar's other son was named Aegon. You know, the little baby that the mountain killed. He had already had a son named Aegon.
Yeah, that is a little strange.
Unless he was like one of those Freys, they're all named Walder.
That's true. That's a good point.
It is another Westeros tradition. Maybe just keep using the same name over and over.
Yeah.
That's fair. Maybe Aegon's like the King James of that universe.
Well, see, I always imagine, because, you know, Rhaegar's first child was his daughter, whom he named Rhaenys. Then his second was his son Aegon. And then the third child, he was following Aegon the Conqueror and his two sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya. And so I figured if it was a girl, he would name her Visenya. If it was a boy, he'd name him Viserys. So John should actually be Viserys Targaryen.
Oh, that's creepy.
Isn't that weird?
That's why nobody wants to use that name. Good riddance to the fear. They got rid of the dragon with his name.
Yeah. So
they're bad eggs.
So this is kind of all to point out that, like, by the show trying to streamline things, they took what was supposed to be an intentionally messy story and just made it a little too straightforward.
Yeah, they wanted to make it a little not as much of a secret. It's more of a... I feel like they just want to really get the romantic aspect out of it, that everyone... The wish fulfillment that the last two seasons have really been about.
Yeah.
And, let's talk about a real ice and fire moment. Sam and Bran would find out that Jon was a real Targaryen, and then someone would come in and kill them, and then no one would ever know. And the readers would, they would just be lost to the world. That would be a real moment.
Yeah.
In Song of Ice and Fire.
That actually, that sounds very Game of Thrones.
I think the rule of Game of Thrones is there's going to be a lot of plans and a lot of courses planned out. No one's ever going to get there unless you're Tywin Lannister.
Absolutely. Yep. An announced plan will never happen.
Yeah, exactly.
It still happened, right? Like they never got the word out. That's where it ended.
Yeah,
that's
it
true.
Could happen.
They could die, right? Oh my God! If that season started with them dying, I'd laugh.
Like some walkers came down and made it to Winterfell and off them first.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
I honestly.
Before they send the instant raven.
The instant raven. Yeah, the ravens that fly at 600 miles per hour.
Perfectly arriving on time.
Yeah, exactly. And this is pretty much the reason why we don't need to talk about the show anymore.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
it's not the way it works. So let's go into the books now. Dinez, do you remember when I first brought it up to you, the question I asked to try and lead you to R+L=J?
No.
So basically, the evidence that is most clear to lead you down the path is Ned Stark is like the most honorable person on the planet. Would he really cheat on his wife?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was, to me, that was like the big thing.
Right.
To your point, when Stannis said, Ned wouldn't have done that. Why don't you call him Ed? Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. So so that's kind of what should lead us to it. But in the books, he still makes it very unclear, because like Ned does think about John a lot when he thinks about bastards. So it's kind of, you do have this idea that John is actually a bastard, you know, that he wouldn't be the legitimate son of Rhaegar. But some of the other things that kind of lead us to it are, obviously we know Rhaegar, and, you know, the story is that Rhaegar took Lyanna, and then Ned returns from the war with a child. And he claims it's his, but he tells us that when he came to Lyanna on her deathbed, she made him promise something. So that kind of gives us an idea like, oh, okay, maybe the promise was that, you know, you should raise this child as your own because Robert would kill it. And like, that all makes, you know, perfect sense. But here's where it gets a little messier. There's more people involved than just Rhaegar, Lyanna, Ned, and John. In the books, we have Ashara Dayne. Now, Ross and Robin, you both read the books, right? You remember Ashara?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, refresh my memory. I read the book years ago.
It's been so long. I don't remember all these people.
So that's kind of the huge deal about it. And maybe that is a red herring, but so I went ahead.
Well, was Ashara Dayne the name of the woman that Ned claimed to have the child with?
So Ned claimed to have had a child with a woman named Wyla. And we later find out that Wyla was a wet nurse down in Dorne. And I'll get to how we find that out a little bit later. But first, so I've made my little pink slips of paper in the books and found a couple of passages that I want to read. Now, this is the first Ned chapter in the entire series. It's only page 35 of the books. And it's Ned and Robert in the crypts of Winterfell. Robert wanted to go see Lyanna's tomb immediately. And so Ned says, "I was with her when she died," Ned reminded the king. "She wanted to come home, to rest beside Brandon and father." Then it switches and he's not talking anymore. It says, "He could hear her still at times. 'Promise me,' she had cried, in a room that smelled of blood and roses. 'Promise me, Ned.'" So we know there's something going on. But then the next time we kind of hear about, you know, John and being a bastard is actually in a Catelyn chapter. And she's, you know, they did this really well in the show that Cat hates John. Right? You guys all got that.
Oh, yeah.
So this is when Catelyn's just kind of thinking back on, you know, those days. And she says, you know, "The Starks were not like other men. Ned brought his bastard home with him and called him son for all the North to see. When the wars were over at last, Catelyn rode to Winterfell. John and his wet nurse had already taken up residence." So she's saying the Starks are not like other men because she almost thinks that by raising John as his own is the honorable thing, you know? And she just hates it that that's what Ned has to do. But then she goes on to say, "That cut deep. Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word. But the castle has no secrets, and Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of their husbands' soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of the Kingsguard, and how their young lord had slain him in single combat. They told afterward how Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The Lady Ashara Dayne, tall and fair, with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal the courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all their years that Ned had ever frightened her. "Never ask me about John," he said, cold as ice. "He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady." So, and then it says, Ashara Dayne's name was never heard in Winterfell again. So, the key weird thing about that is that she asked him about Ashara, but his response was, "Never ask me about John."
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, why is he playing into the idea that this Ashara Dayne is who he had John with? Like, what do you guys think he was trying to get across there?
I feel like he's not a liar. He doesn't know how to lie. Any kind of pressure around, like, kind of such a sensitive topic, like something he has to lie about, and something that hurts him to lie about his wife, who he loves more than anything. It's just any kind of pressure on it kind of puts him off. I think if he was, what's it called, if Cersei interrogated him for like 3 hours about it, he would figure a way to like get it out of him. Just
right.
Because he's not a good liar, and the only thing he could do is be aggressive about it and get some like people just try and back off about it, and just like not really dig at all.
Right.
If they know it triggers him, they'll be like, okay, Ned Stark never gets this way. He's usually a just, level-headed man. If this is making him angry, I don't want to push this button. I think that's his only defense.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And the key there being, though, she asked him about Ashara Dayne, and his response was to bring up John. So there's some connection between Ashara Dayne and John.
Absolutely.
Like you said, like Ned is not the type to like lie constantly. So, if there wasn't any sort of connection, like he wouldn't make that connection for her.
Well, do you think he also heard all those rumors too, and he knew where she was going and it was just like...
Probably, honestly. I think Ned was, he was usually, up on the ramparts, listening in. He was very watchful. I think he heard some of the rumors, and he just didn't expect her to confront him about it. Rumors be rumors. He didn't want to, deny or encourage them either way, so he was just trying to let them, burn out over time. People will have rumors, but if you don't give them anything, they're not going to, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to disappear eventually. But, he can't outright lie to his wife. It's not in him. And if he did, I think it would just come off so obvious.
Right.
So he had to go to a different tactic with it.
Right.
But I think, that's a great connection. I actually did not remember that part of it at all.
Right. And the important thing being here, if John really is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, then why did he make the leap from her asking him about Ashara Dayne to, don't ask about John, John is my blood? You see what I'm saying? It's kind of weird. It almost, maybe R+L doesn't equal J.
Yeah.
So let's take this a little bit further, because we know a bit more. So there's not that many passages about this whole mystery, It's kind of, Ned will think about it in passing in the first book, but there's really 2 or 3 other huge references to it. And before I actually read those, I want to give you guys some backstory on the history. So, Robert's Rebellion happens on kind of an interesting timeline. Basically, what happens, what kind of sets it all off, is there's a tournament at Harrenhall. And at this tournament, all these people are there. And what ends up happening is that Rhaegar wins the tournament. And remember how in the first season, Loras won the tournament and gave Sansa the rose?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like crowning the Queen of Love and Beauty. So he was supposed to give it to his wife, Elia of Dorne. And instead, he gave a crown of winter roses to Lyanna Stark. So that's where people think the seeds of Robert's Rebellion were sown, because shortly after that is when Lyanna disappears with Rhaegar.
Yeah.
But
No, yeah, that was. I think that was definitely a big part where a lot of people get the theory started, and I wish they would go back eventually, maybe even.
yeah. So here's the thing about the whole tournament at Harrenhal. We're never really given like a... Well, I guess they did in the World of Ice and Fire give kind of a more concrete, here's what happened. We're told about the tournament at Harrenhal in book 3, and it's actually Mira telling Bran as if it's a fun story, you know? As if it's like, you know, a story for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what book that was in, so okay.
Yeah, so...
It might have been Jamie or somebody telling the story.
Right. Well, you know, they'll kind of like randomly say like, yes, when Rhaegar crowned her the Queen of Love and Beauty, you know, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so this one's kind of long, so I'm not gonna actually like read the whole thing, but I'm gonna skip to the important parts. So Mira's telling him the story, and she starts off with telling it from the perspective of a Cranogman, which are, you know, the Reeds. And it's very obvious that she's talking about her father, Howland Reed. You know, she kind of says, like, he was like us, small like all Cranogmen, brave, smart, and strong, grew up hunting, fishing, blah, blah, blah. And so he decided to go out to the Isle of Faces. Now, the Isle of Faces is almost like the Avalon of Westeros. It's like this island in the middle of a lake that's called the God's Eye, and it's right across, like, Harrenhal is on that lake. But weirdly, like, no one else seems to have ever been to the Isle of Faces. Do you guys remember if they mention it in the show at all?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Not that I recall.
Yeah, I think that's just too deep for the show.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like this magical place, we're led to believe, because Mira says that he wanted to visit... Well, so Mira's talking about it, and Bran says, no one ever visits the Isle of Faces. That's where the Green Men live. And she says that it was the Green Men he meant to find. So I guess we can imagine maybe the Children of the Forest live there. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. So after he stays on the Isle of Faces for a season, so he spent years there. She says, but that's another story. So I'd imagine something happened to Howland Reed on the Isle of Faces. So anyways, he's leaving and he gets back, and all of a sudden there's this huge tournament at Harrenhal, and he's right there. So he decides to stop in. And Mira says, the king himself was there with his son, the Dragon Prince. The White Swords had come as well to welcome a new brother to their ranks. That's Jaime Lannister. The Storm Lord was on hand, Robert Baratheon, and the Rose Lord as well, Mace Tyrell. The Great Lion of the Rock had quarreled with the king and stayed away. So that's actually Tywin. He had been Hand of the King for like over a decade with the Mad King. And when the Mad King made Jaime a Kingsguard Tywin saw that as like the ultimate offense because it meant Jaime could no longer inherit Casterly Rock. So that's what actually caused the falling out between Tywin and Aerys. So then he says, she says, the daughter of the great castle reigned as Queen of Love and Beauty when the tourney opened. 5 champions had sworn to defend her crown, her 4 brothers of Harrenhall, and her famous uncle, a white knight of the Kingsguard. So that famous uncle is actually Oswell Whent, who ends up being one of the Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy. And then blah, blah, blah. There's... Howland Reed gets into a fight with 3 squires, and they shoved him down every time he tried to rise. Then they heard a roar. "That's my father's man you're kicking," howled the she-wolf. The she-wolf is Lyanna Stark. The she-wolf laid into the squires with a tourney sword, scattering them all. So Lyanna kind of fights off these squires, takes Howland Reed, and then she says she met with her pack brothers, the wild wolf who led them, the quiet wolf beside him, and the pup who was the youngest. So the wild wolf is Brandon Stark, the quiet wolf is Ned, and the pup is Benjen Stark. So then we have Howland Reed hanging out with the Starks at this tournament. And then it says, under Harren's roof he ate and drank with the wolves, and many of their sworn swords besides. The Dragon Prince sang a song so sad it made the wolf maid sniffle. So Rhaegar is playing a song, and Lyanna takes notice of it. Then it says, a black brother spoke, asking the knights to join the Night's Watch. The Storm Lord drank down the Night of Skulls and Kisses, blah, blah, blah. Here's the key part. A Cranagman saw the maid with laughing purple eyes dance with a white sword, a red snake, the Lord of Griffins, and lastly with the quiet wolf. But only after the wild wolf spoke to her on behalf of a brother too shy to leave his bench. So what he's saying there, or she's saying there, is that Ashara Dayne danced with Ned after Brandon went over and talked to her. So we have Ashara Dayne at the tourney of Harrenhall hanging out with the Starks. So this would actually time up pretty well for a baby about the age of Jon. It would also time out pretty well for a baby about the same age as Daenerys. Because remember, she was born shortly after the Tower of Joy situation, but we don't really know that much about Daenerys and her backstory. Anyways, the story goes on, and then we get, to the ending about how Rhaegar had crowned Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, but the important part is they find the squires again, and then a mystery knight enters the list and challenges their knights, unseats them all, and he becomes called the Knight of the Laughing Tree because he takes a random shield with a weirwood face on it. Now, there's a lot of different theories. Like, this one has been picked apart big time. Some people think it's Lyanna. Some people think it's Ned. People think it's all sorts of different people. But the important part is that after the Knight of the Laughing Tree unseated them, Rhaegar was sent by the king to go find the knight. So that's why a lot of people think it was actually Lyanna dressed as this mystery knight, because she was supposed to be, really good on a horse. And so she actually could conceivably beat other knights at jousting. So what do you guys think about that?
So it'd be Lyanna.
Right? It definitely sounds like her.
That's interesting. And that sets up a nice connection to her niece, Arya,
Right. And Ned Ned mentions many times that Arya is a lot like Lyanna.
Oh, yeah, you're right, yeah. That's interesting.
I think that's a pretty good connection between them two, and it's just also another good thing I like in Game of Thrones in general, just, kind of the roles of women and just like how it's, it's like, oh, they're not supposed to fight, they're not supposed to do this, that, the other thing. But like they're not supposed to be tacticians, they're not supposed to do like lead wars. But we see Arya being one of the great, assassin later. I wouldn't say a great fighter. That's in the TV series.
Right.
We see Daenerys, and Cersei. Well, I would say more Daenerys. She leads well. She leads very well. She's a strong character through and through. And we see her, what was I going to say? Being very cunning, actually, at certain things. And just, like when we see her get the Unsullied from the Maesters and, like, not actually give up the dragon.
Yeah.
Or with the Harpies. That scenario as well. And then we see Cersei. Cersei's a little bit, I would say, I just don't favor her character too much, but she is very she knows how to politically maneuver very well.
Yeah.
She knows her shortcomings she knows what her shortcomings are, and she knows how to take credit for people's actual hard work.
Yeah.
And make them her own.
Absolutely.
So we see women actually do much better than men in this world because they're so underestimated. So seeing Lyanna being crowned one of the greatest jousters, in the of that era, I think would also fit into it as well. That whole theme of it, that women are always underestimated, just because of their gender, but really they shouldn't be because over and over it's proven that they can match up with men or surpass them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's actually one of my favorite passages is when Catelyn is talking with Mage Mormont, who is Jorah's aunt, and Mage is basically saying, because she's getting up there in age and she's witnessed so many men go off to war, and she's saying then that leaves the women to run the castles and the lands and everything, and oftentimes they're better than the men were at it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, I'm gonna jump off, guys. I'm gonna take some stuff upstairs and whatnot, but it was fun.
All right,
I can't wait to hear how you guys finish up the conversation.
Oh, we're gonna solve it.
All right, sounds good.
Yep. All right, so we have that going on, the tourney of Harrenhall. So let's kind of get a sense of the timeline of Robert's Rebellion, because it's kind of weird. So we have that tournament, and then we have Lyanna getting quote-unquote kidnapped. Then Ned's father and older brother, Brandon and Rickard Stark, go down to King's Landing to confront, the Mad King and demand her back. And it's kind of one of the more, insane scenes that would have been cool, but I understand why they didn't show it in the show. So the Mad King he arrests them for treason, and Ned's father, Rickard, demands a trial by combat. And so the Mad King chooses fire as his combatant and is burning Rickard Stark alive in his armor, and then attaches Brandon to this machine that will tighten around his neck the more he struggles, and places a sword just out of reach to cut him free. And so basically has Brandon Stark choke himself to death while his father roasts alive in front of him. Isn't that Mad King?
Yeah, it's crazy. I thought they both just burned, but oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, George Martin is very creative with his deaths.
Oh, yeah.
So that happens. Then the war begins. And, that's when Ned and Catelyn's father, Hoster Tully, kind of make the alliance, and he marries. Brandon was supposed to marry Cat, actually. And so, like, him being dead, Ned takes his brother's place and marries Cat. So Robb is conceived sometime early in the war. Then they're having these battles. Obviously Robert Baratheon becomes a big part of it. Jon Arryn, because Jon Arryn basically raised Robert and Ned together. Mm-hmm. So you have the forces of the North, the Riverlands, the Vale, and the Stormlands all fighting against the Targaryens. And then what's weird about it, how I said it, it's kind of a weird timeline, is there's then months when not much really happens. And then all of a sudden, a year later, we get everything happening. We get the battle at the Trident when Rhaegar gets killed. We get the sack of King's Landing, when Jaime kills the Mad King. We get the liberation of Storm's End, which is the whole thing, why Stannis hates the Tyrells. And then we get the Tower of Joy. So it's kind of interesting how this whole thing times out. So I want to get to the Tower of Joy next, but do you guys have any questions about the war itself, Robert's Rebellion?
Well, if the war, if all that took a year later.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Jon be younger than Robb? Or Jon is older than Robb, isn't he?
Well, Robb is a little bit older than Jon, actually.
Okay, I thought it was the opposite. Okay.
Yeah, because Robb
is older.
Robb was conceived right at the beginning of the war.
Okay.
And I guess we're supposed to suppose that Rhaegar and Lyanna, were hooking up for a few months.
Yeah.
And then...
So,
yeah.
Ashara theory, where would that fit in that timeline? If Harrenhall was over a year.
Right. So, that kind of wouldn't really... let's see. Now I can't remember the ages. Yeah, actually, you're right. If the theory is that Brandon or Ned got Ashara pregnant,
mm-hmm.
and that would have had to been at the beginning or before the war even began.
Yeah.
So, but then again, even a young baby you can kind of pass off as being a different amount of months.
True.
If you've got a 6-month-old, you could probably say that that's a 3-month-old.
Yeah. Well, and Westeros, there is a history of baby swapping.
There absolutely is.
You have Gilly's baby and Mance Rayder's son.
Yep.
Right? And that's...
So yeah, actually, Dinez, that's something you're not familiar with.
I know. That wasn't even in the show, was it? No. No, not at all.
So...
Yeah, because in the book, Mance is still alive and kicking.
Yep.
I believe he is, right?
Yeah, he's still alive. And when Jon sends Sam and Gilly down, he actually swaps Gilly's baby with Mance's baby.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So, Gilly is, crying the entire time because she's had her baby taken away.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It is crazy. But it's all because of, Mance's heir.
Well, and then there's also another very big baby swap. Do you know which one I'm referring to?
There's more than one baby swap? Oh,
there's more than one baby swap.
Well, what about, the whole thing with Aegon?
Yep.
Right? Is he really dead? Is he frisk? Is he...
Yeah, so Dinez,
yeah.
In the 5th book, remember how Tyrion was kind of with Varys after he had killed his father, and then he ran into Jorah, and Jorah took him to Daenerys? Yeah?
Yeah.
So, in the books, Tyrion's actually with a whole group of people.
Yeah.
And they're all, basically there to raise this 15 or 16-year-old boy who's there, who has the purple eyes of a Targaryen, and it becomes a reveal later in the story that this is actually the original Aegon, the one that supposedly the Mountain killed. Varys swapped the babies during the sack of King's Landing and took this other baby and brought him across to Essos, where they've been raising him in order to take Westeros back.
Wow.
So
But it's also very, so you don't know if it's true or not.
well, I happen to think, well, that's true.
Yeah.
It's even more murky that, is that really the Aegon that he took, or is this another child that Varys is just lying about, and that they're going to tell everyone is Aegon, but is actually another child that they've been intentionally raising to take over?
I feel cheated that I know none of this.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely not going to happen in the show.
There's a lot. I mean, they had to leave a lot of stuff out, and that's one of the things that never made it.
Yeah, definitely not. And I understand why. A lot of people don't really like that he expanded the story way further in books 4 and 5. A lot of people wanted it to continue the thread of the characters they already know.
Mm-hmm.
Me personally, I love it. I love that they're adding in more things, that the world feels bigger and richer.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So we've kind of gone through the timeline of Robert's Rebellion. And so now let me read for you guys the Tower of Joy passage. It's only a page and a half, so I'm just going to read the whole thing.
So where did Tower of Joy happen in the books? That's what I couldn't remember. Is it the first? Is it Ned?
It's Ned. But here, I'm glad you asked, because that's kind of important. Ned right now is having a fever dream, because this is after he got stabbed by Jaime. Remember when he was trying to leave King's Landing?
Yeah.
And so he's been, like, sick in bed, and, like, he's basically hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of raises the question, like, how accurate is this? Can we really take this as sort of, like, fact? Or is this meant to be kind of a more... has his memory been altered? That sort of thing. So it begins the chapter. He dreamt an old dream of 3 knights in white cloaks and a tower long fallen, and Lyanna in her bed of blood. In the dream his friends rode with him as they had in life. Proud Martin Cassell, Jory's father, faithful Theo Wool, Ethan Glover, who had been Brandon's squire, Sir Mark Risewell, soft of speech and gentle of heart, the Cranagman Howland Reed, Lord Dustin on his great red stallion. Ned had known their faces as well as he knew his own once. But the years leech at a man's memories, even those he has vowed never to forget. In the dream they were only shadows, grey wraiths on horses made of mist. They were 7 facing 3, in the dream as it had been in life. Yet these were no ordinary 3. They waited before the round tower, the red mountains of Dorne at their backs, their white cloaks billowing in the wind. And these were no shadows. Their faces burned clear even now. Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, had a sad smile on his lips. The hilt of the great sword Dawn poked up over his right shoulder. Sir Oswell Went was on one knee, sharpening his blade with a whetstone. Across his white enameled helm the black bat of his house spread its wings. Between them stood fierce old Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. I looked for you on the Trident, Ned said to them. We were not there, Sir Gerald answered. Woe to the usurper if we had been, said Sir Oswell. When King's Landing fell, Sir Jaime slew your king with a golden sword, and I wondered where you were. Far away, Sir Gerald said, or Ares would yet sit the Iron Throne, and our false brother would burn in 7 hells. I came down on Sword's End to lift the siege, Ned told them, and the lords Tyrell and Redwine dipped their banners, and all their knights bent the knee to pledge us fealty. I was certain you would be among them. Our knees do not bend easily, said Arthur Dayne. Sir Willem Darry is fled to Dragonstone, with your queen and Prince Viserys. I thought you might have sailed with him. Sir Willem is a good man and true, said Sir Oswell, but not of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald pointed out. The Kingsguard does not flee. Then or now, said Sir Arthur. He donned his helm. We swore a vow, explained old Sir Gerald. Ned's wraiths moved up beside him, with shadow swords in hand. They were 7 against 3. And now it begins, said Sir Arthur Dayne, the sword of the morning. He unsheathed Dawn and held it with both hands. The blade was pale as milk glass, alive with light. No, Ned said with sadness in his voice. Now it ends. As they came together in a rush of steel and shadow, he could hear Lyanna screaming. Eddard, she called. A storm of rose petals blew across a blood-streaked sky, as blue as the eyes of death. Lord Eddard, Lyanna called again. I promise, he whispered. Leah, I promise. Lord Eddard, a man echoed from the dark. Groaning, Eddard Stark opened his eyes. So then he wakes up from the dream. So that's a key thing to the R plus L equals J theory. Why would 3 Kingsguard be guarding Lyanna Stark? Why would they not be where the places that Ned said that they should be? Why would they not be on the Trident protecting Rhaegar? And if you believe in R plus L equals J, the obvious answer is...
Well, yeah. Yeah.
They have the heir to the throne with them.
Yeah. Especially if he, if it was an old and he's legit.
Well,
that totally makes sense.
Right. But then that's what's kind of weird about it is, like, this whole thing is so messy. But they also say, we swore a vow. Now, are they referring to their Kingsguard vows? Or did Rhaegar make them stay there? It kind of raises the question of, like, this is a problem Jaime mentions many times, like, you swear so many vows in your life, if you break one to keep another one, does that make you dishonorable? So it's entirely possible that the vow was to protect Lyanna at Rhaegar's request, but not because, there was the heir to the throne, because Rhaegar wanted this child protected, because Rhaegar was all about prophecy. And Rhaegar may have believed that by having a child with Lyanna, he's able to actually, birth Azor Ahai, or the prince that was promised. Any thoughts?
Deep thoughts. So when you say that Rhaegar he knew about all the prince who was promised stuff,
yeah.
Or did that come after?
So that is in book 5 when, and it's actually Barristan ends up giving us a lot more along this thread when he's talking to Daenerys.
Okay.
And he kind of mentioned also Aemon mentions, about Rhaegar being really into prophecy. But what Barristan says is that, Daenerys has been told by Viserys and all sorts of people that Rhaegar was this great fighter.
Yeah.
But the truth is he really wasn't. And Barristan kind of says, no, he was more like the moody artist type. Like, he loved to play the harp and do all this stuff. He wasn't really so much about fighting. And then he got really into reading. And then after, reading something, he came to Barristan and said, you have to teach me how to become a great fighter.
Okay.
So it's almost like he read a prophecy somewhere that he needed to be a great warrior in order to, make something happen. Or maybe he thought that he was the prince that was promised.
Maybe.
And that he needed to become a great warrior in order to be the legend.
Yeah. Could be. Too bad he's dead. Too bad he's dead.
Old
Is
Rhaegar.
He? Maybe he'll come back when the white cake,
Yeah.
the night cake comes down. So, no, it's interesting.
But I'm glad you mentioned Barristan.
Barristan. Whatever happened to Barristan?
Well, he died in the show. He did. He got killed by the Sons of the Harpy. The what?
Oh, that's right. Is he still alive in the books?
Very much so. In the books, he's the one trying to keep Meereen held together. After Daenerys flies off on Drogon, there's like no one left to rule Meereen. And, they're being attacked by the Astapori and the Yunkai and the Second Sons. And
they all kind of come after
They all come together. Even the Ironborn are there at this point. And the book ends before the real battle of Meereen. Yeah. So we just have kind of Barristan being like, fuck, I don't know what to do.
That's right. Okay.
But...
Oh, gosh, it's so long. That's why it's so long.
But I'm glad you brought it up because Barristan, says some more things about it, because another important thing is that Barristan was actually in love with Ashara Dayne.
Okay.
So he's having a memory here, and he says the memory was still bitter. Sir Oswell went of the Kingsguard. Oh wait, I skipped something. With Varys whispering in his ear, King Aerys became convinced that his son was conspiring to depose him. That whence tourney was a ploy to give Rhaegar the pretext for meeting with many great lords as could be brought together. Aerys had not set foot outside the Red Keep since Duskendale, yet suddenly he announced that he would accompany Rhaegar to Harrenhall, and everything had gone awry from there. So already he's saying, like, Rhaegar may have been putting on the tournament in order to create a rebellion against his own father.
Huh.
And then he goes on to say, if I had been a better knight, if I had unhorsed the prince in that last tilt, as I unhorsed so many others, it would have been for me to choose the Queen of Love and Beauty. Rhaegar had chosen Lyanna Stark of Winterfell. Barristan Selmy would have made a different choice. Not the Queen, who was present, nor Elia of Dorne, though she was good and gentle. His choice would have been a young maiden not long at court, one of Elia's companions. Though compared to Ashara Dayne, the Dornish princess was kitchen drab. Even after all these years, Sir Barristan could still recall Ashara's smile, the sound of her laughter. He had only to close his eyes to see her with her long dark hair tumbling about her shoulders, those haunting purple eyes. Daenerys has the same eyes. Sometimes when the queen looked at him, he felt as if he were looking at Ashara's daughter. But Ashara's daughter had been stillborn, and his fair lady had thrown herself from a tower soon after, mad with grief for the child she had lost, and perhaps for the man who had dishonored her at Harrenhal as well. She died never knowing that Sir Barristan had loved her. How could she? He was a knight of the Kingsguard. No good could come from telling her his feelings. No good came from silence either. If I had unhorsed Rhaegar and crowned Ashara Queen of Love and Beauty, might she have looked to me instead of to Stark? So Barristan's basically flat out telling us one of the Starks knocked up Ashara. And he believes that she had a stillbirth, and that's why she committed suicide and jumped off the tower. And that's kind of one of those stories that, gets repeated a lot, but what's weird about it is that the Danes don't hate Ned Stark.
Mm-hmm.
The Danes actually seem to kind of like Ned Stark. So it's like, if the story as we understand it is that Ned knocked her up at Harrenhal, he then was at the Tower of Joy, picked up a baby, then he took the baby and he took Arthur Dayne's sword, which is like their house family sword, to Starfall, and then she killed herself over it, why would they like Ned? You know? And not only that, he didn't return the bones of Sir Arthur Dayne. So he kind of like dishonored them in multiple ways.
Right. So R plus L has to equal J then.
But why would the Danes like him now if, you know, all of this stuff has happened and...
Well, you're talking about Ned.
Right.
Right. Well, they would like Ned if he didn't do any of that stuff. Maybe it was his brother.
Maybe it was Brandon who knocked up Ashara.
Maybe.
Well, and that's kind of a very good point, because I actually happen to think that is what happened. Because George Martin writes a lot of stories about love triangles, and almost always the main character is the quiet wolf, you know, the Ned Stark, who wanted to dance with her, but had to have his brother work up the courage to go talk to her first, and then she ends up going with the other guy. So I think that definitely something happened with Ashara, and Barristan said if she hadn't looked to Stark. He intentionally doesn't say which Stark.
Yeah.
So it definitely sounds like it could be Brandon. But
It's possible.
yeah. So then, you know, you guys are probably wondering why I'm saying that the Danes like Ned, because later when Arya is with the Brotherhood, remember in season 3 when she met up with them?
Okay.
With them is a guy named Ned Dayne, short for Edric Dayne. And he's actually talking about how, you know, I was named for your father. And also, I have the same wet nurse, Wyla, as Jon Snow.
Interesting.
So that makes it sound like Jon Snow was at Starfall. You know, like he was born, and, you know, Ned brought the baby from the Tower of Joy, or Jon was actually born from Ashara Dayne. And then he would be the son of Ashara and Brandon instead of Rhaegar and Lyanna.
I don't believe it. He would still be Ned's blood.
Right.
To
Exactly. To go back to the first thing he said. He's my blood. That's all you need to know.
Huh.
And
very interesting.
The other kind of weird thing that would feed into that theory more than R plus L equals J is that in the first book, when Rhaegar is mentioned, Ned says that like he hadn't thought of Rhaegar in years. But if he was raising the bastard son of Rhaegar, wouldn't he have thought about him a lot?
Now, who does he say that to, though?
It's one of his thoughts.
Oh, it's one of his thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't think he'd lie to himself.
Himself, yeah, no, okay. No, that's interesting. Unless it is a really obvious red herring or something like that. Very interesting.
It could
or
be.
Is it that he considers Jon, his son, so holy that he never thinks of his father? Yeah, he just accepted it.
Right.
Because to Ned Stark, Jon Snow is his son 100%, I think.
Yeah.
Like he might be a Snow, but, you know, like when Jon said in the finale, I think he's like, I am a Stark and a Snow. You know, he really was a Stark. Like,
right.
Even though Cat hated his guts, you know, he really was.
Right. In fact, they talk about how of all the children, only Arya and Jon even look like Starks. All the others look like Cat.
Yeah. And other than Sansa, all the other kids totally embraced Jon as well. You know, I think Sansa's the only one who was a little distant from him.
Right.
In the books. Thinking not just the show, but I think also in the books. She kind of favors her mother a lot. So.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So she was never all that into Jon. In fact,
you know,
one of the things...
maybe
No, go ahead.
No, I was like, maybe that's something else. Like, for Ned, and Ned is like, you know, he's the best person in Westeros, right? Like,
Yeah.
He would embrace this orphan child as his own wholly and completely, and you know, maybe he wouldn't think about this other guy. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
It is interesting food for thought, though.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of with you on that being a little bit flimsy of evidence to say that there is no R plus L equals J.
Yeah.
But here's to take it a little bit further. So this is when Arya is with Ned Dane, and you know they're kind of talking. How do you know about John? He's my milk brother. Brother, Arya didn't understand, but you're from Dorne. How could you and John be blood? Milk brothers, not blood. My lady mother had no milk when I was little, so Wyla had to nurse me. Arya was lost. Who's Wyla? Jon Snow's mother. He never told you? She's served us for years and years, since before I was born. This is Arya now thinking, John has a mother? Wyla is her name? She would need to remember so she could tell him the next time she saw him. She wondered if he would still call her little sister. I'm not so little anymore. He'd have to call me something else. Maybe once she got to River Run, she could write John a letter and tell him what Ned Dane had said, that there was an Arthur Dane, the one they called the Sword of the Morning. My father was Sir Arthur's elder brother. Lady Ashara was my aunt. I never knew her, though. She threw herself into the sea from atop the Palestone Tower before I was born. Why would she do that? Ned looked wary. Maybe he was afraid she was going to throw something at him. Your lord father never spoke of her? The Lady Ashara Dayne of Starfall? No. Did he know her? Before Robert was king, she met your father and his brothers at Harrenhall during the year of the False Spring. Oh. Arya didn't know what else to say. Why did she dump into the sea, though? Her heart was broken. Sansa would have sighed and shed a tear for true love, but Arya just thought it was stupid. She couldn't say that to Ned, though not about his own aunt. Did someone break it? He hesitated. Perhaps it's not my place. Tell me. He looked at her uncomfortably. My Aunt Illyria says Lady Ashara and your father fell in love at Harrenhall. That's not so. He loved my lady mother. I'm sure he did, my lady, but she was the only one he loved. He must have found that bastard under a cabbage leaf then, Gendry said from behind them. Arya wished she had another crab apple to bounce off his face. My father had honor, she said angrily. And we weren't talking to you anyways. So, it seems like the story at Starfall is that Ned and Ashara were in love. And then after that, Arya's talking to one of the few Northmen that's in with the Brotherhood, and his name's Harwin, and Harwin keeps telling her, like, this was before your father was supposed to marry your mother. This was when your father was supposed to, or your mother was supposed to marry Brandon Stark. So there's no dishonor in it. It's totally fine, but Arya's still, like, flipped out about it.
Yeah.
So we definitely have, like, a much messier story here than just the simple R plus L must equal J.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Right.
why would it have been really popular? It's a wet nurse. I don't know.
What were you saying, Inez?
I was just saying, like, in terms of consequences for the plot line, the R plus L equals J is the biggest in terms of what that then leads to. Yeah, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. But
Which is the reason, to me, I mean, it still seems like the most viable option.
yeah. And to tie it all back, I do, even though I like that there's so many more possibilities and it is a messier story, I do still think R plus L equals J is the truth. But I really like the idea that Ashara Dayne had a child, and maybe that's the Aegon that we had talked about earlier. Maybe that's who's being raised as Aegon Targaryen. Because the Danes have purple eyes.
Purple eyes.
That's the important thing, the Valyrian feature.
So Griff would really be Matt Masters.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about Daenerys' dreams and visions that she has about? I don't know if you're working your way there at all.
I actually was, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, because that's where I wanted to because that's the whole that to me is where it really points to R plus L equals J is her
right.
House of Undying.
She has visions in the House of the Undying that point to it.
I think that's where, as a reader, I kind of was like, wait a minute, what is this dream about? And I went online and started digging myself,
Oh, that's really cool. That was what led you to R plus L equals J?
I think so. It might have been, I think that was what led me to it when I started, a friend of mine, I was talking to somebody, I remember them saying, oh yeah, anytime there's a dream, it's like there are all these theories about dreams. So
yep, absolutely.
On the internet.
And not only that, there are so many dreams in the books.
Yeah.
Basically, you get a dream like most chapters. You'll get at least a dream.
Well, and like you said, Ned was a dream. It was a fever dream.
Right.
He's remembering stuff too. So,
exactly.
It always leads to the question is how reliable is this stuff? But that Daenerys dream is pretty big, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in that. I don't know if you have
Oh, I do.
Okay, I was gonna say, but you probably have it all noted out.
Yep. Before I get into it, Dinez, do you remember? Were there any in the show? Were there any visions in the House of the Undying that related to the North, or because I can't remember, to be honest.
I thought that scene might have been in there. But I don't remember it. Yeah, if it was.
Yeah.
It's been so long.
Or I know she saw the throne room covered in snow.
Yeah.
But that's not really an R plus L equal. Oh, she goes to the wall, but she doesn't see anything there.
Mm.
But that is, I imagine, what you're referring to. But here's another important aspect, though. The House of the Undying in the books, and did they have her do this in the show as well? Did they have her drink the shade of the evening?
I can't even. I should have gone back and watched it. Now that I'm thinking about it, I know I read the I was rereading some of the stuff, but I didn't look at the.
Yeah.
I feel like they did.
Yeah, they did have her drink it. I think they might have. Like she goes in and Pyat Pri is there, and he's got a vial for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's important, because the shade of the evening is very clearly a hallucinogenic drug.
Mm-hmm.
Once she drinks it, she automatically starts describing sensations that are very much like tripping. So even though this isn't a dream, it's still a hallucination, and a vision. Yeah. And that's why I kind of feel like people maybe pick things apart a little bit too much, because I think they're meant to be vague, since, like we say, these are hallucinations or dreams or something. I don't think that George Martin believes in clear word-for-word prophecy. I think he believes more in puppet masters kind of guiding people. And I think that the visions she witnessed were intended for her to witness by the warlocks or by, other people. So she's at the House of the Undying. Oh, and another important thing. one of the first things I noted here is that she remembers, and a lot of characters go back to memories that they repeat over and over again in their minds. For Daenerys, she keeps remembering this house with a red door that she believes is in Braavos with a lemon tree out front, which is where she was raised.
Uh-huh.
But what's weird about it is, and this is given in breadcrumbs throughout the story, there would be no lemon trees in Braavos. Braavos is described as like a wet, cold place with almost no trees. It's stones everywhere. And, you know, lemons are tropical fruit. You know, they only grow in warm climates. And Martin even has different characters like point out that lemons don't grow in certain levels. So already we're introduced to the idea that Daenerys' idea of her childhood is probably a lie.
Mm.
You know, like what she's been told is probably not true. So that kind of...
that's probably a given, I think. Yeah.
So then that means Daenerys could easily be in this formula of Rhaegar and Lyanna having a child and possibly Brandon and Ashara having a child.
Mm.
So maybe Daenerys isn't who we think she is.
Could be.
And another important aspect of that is, remember the woman in season 2 in Karth with the wooden mask?
Okay.
Who kind of like talks to Daenerys in riddles?
Yeah.
So that's Quaithe. And she has a much bigger part in the books where she will just appear to Daenerys. It's really bizarre, and it's not very clear how it works or how her magic works. But she's one of the ones that gives her a lot of these quote-unquote prophecies. And one of the things she keeps telling her is, remember who you are, Daenerys. Remember who you are. Now, on first read, most people take that as like, oh, she's just saying, you know, you're a Targaryen, be a Targaryen. But maybe she's saying, you're not who you think you are.
Mm.
You know, maybe she's actually the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Or maybe she's the child of Brandon and Ashara.
Yeah.
But okay.
Which would make the whole Virtutes thing a little less creepy.
Right.
There's that creep.
If they're not actually related.
Or yeah, not yeah, totally.
So, I've opened up to the House of the Undying, and she goes through a lot of weird visions. And a lot of them seem to be like things that happened in the past. So here's one, and it actually gave me a little bit of pause because one of our criticisms of the show was that the Rhaegar that they depicted looked way too much like Viserys. So she's having a vision and she goes, Viserys, was her first thought the next time she paused, but a second glance told her otherwise. The man had her brother's hair, but he was taller, and his eyes were a dark indigo rather than lilac. Aegon, he said to the woman nursing a newborn babe in the wooden bed, what better name for a king? Will you make a song for him, the woman asked. He has a song, the man replied. He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's. It seemed as if he saw her standing there beyond the door. There must be one more, he said, though whether he was speaking to her or the woman in the bed, she could not say. The dragon has 3 heads. He went to his window seat, picked up a harp, ran his fingers lightly over its silvery strings. Sweet sadness filled the room as man and wife and babe faded like the morning mist, only the music lingering to speed her on her way. So, the book actually said that Rhaegar looked a lot like Viserys.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was maybe a criticism not to make.
Yeah.
But the point being, and then I was like, wait a minute, is this supposed to be, Rhaegar and Lyanna, and he actually did say the name should be Aegon. But then it's like, no, he's saying that he needs to have one more. So this is his second child, Aegon, who he had with Elia of Dorne. Not.
Or
Go ahead.
Or is he saying there should be one more Aegon?
Meaning a third Aegon?
Yeah, like he's naming his second child Aegon. Or does he mean there should be one more as another Targaryen?
Well, I think it's because
Jon and Dany's child.
I think it's because he wants to have a third to be another daughter, so it will be Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. That one, definitely, the fact that the woman isn't described at all does make it a little bit weird. Like could that have been Lyanna, or is that Elia? We don't know.
Yeah, it really does leave it open.
Yeah.
It does tie into that Jon's name could be Aegon if that is the case.
Right.
That's where it comes from.
I personally, though, I think that this is the other Aegon, and that this was kind of like setting up the audience for in book 5 when Aegon returns. But it could go either way. Everything is mysterious.
Yeah.
So then she kind of like wanders through the house. She has so many visions in the house of the Undying.
Really
She's tripping balls. and that's another funny thing. She actually meets the quote unquote Undying.
Yeah.
Like in the show, they kind of made you think that the warlocks are the Undying. But in the books, the Undying are almost like a hive-minded group of people. And they're surrounding this pulsing blue heart. It's really bizarre, but,
I remember it being really creepy and having to, read it more than once, too.
Yeah, but she's tripping,
understand what the hell was going on.
Yeah. So, she comes across the Undying, and they give her, the prophecy that everyone has picked apart more than anything, where they say, Oh, 3 heads of the dragon, mother of dragons, child of storm. 3 fires you must light. 1 for life, 1 for death, and 1 for love. 3 mounts you must ride. 1 to bed, 1 to dread, and 1 to love. And 3 treasons you will know. Once for blood, once for gold, and once for love. So people have poured that apart. But that's not the one I wanted to get to. So then after she sees the Undying, all of a sudden the visions start just washing over her, one after another. Like she sees what she would imagine, to be her son, a tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair beneath the banners of a fiery stallion, a burning city behind him. Then she has a vision of Rhaegar. Rubies flew like drops of blood from the chest of a dying prince, and he sank to his knees in the water. With his last breath, murmured a woman's name. So that was probably Rhaegar saying Lyanna's name. And then she sees... Oh yeah, this is a Euron reference. A corpse stood at the prow of a ship, eyes bright in his dead face, gray lips smiling sadly. And then this is the one that you were referencing, Robin. A blue flower grew from a chink in a wall of ice and filled the air with sweetness. So blue flowers are what Lyanna is so associated with. And growing in a chink in a wall of ice means something about Lyanna is at the wall. That's gotta be Jon Snow, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's just... like you said, people have torn it apart so much. But I've always just believed that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like it.
like that's a little clearly telegraphed for everyone.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear. I don't know. But she's tripping and there's a bunch of wizards controlling her. So who knows?
Right. Exactly. She's
Yeah,
hallucinating. So, but also it's
Yeah.
like this is just sort of a vision given to her. Like she would have no sense of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And so why was this vision given to her?
Yeah. Well, I wonder if that will come into it, like when she returns to Winterfell next season or something, or in the future. Maybe there'll be something to tie this together, if it is true or not.
Yeah.
That would be interesting if they, she goes and sees all the statues and there's little flowers growing miraculously out of the I don't know, but there could be some kind of imagery or something that comes out of it, that ties it together. And
yeah. Or there may never be,
There might never be. And
it might be a total
too.
mystery.
Yeah, it could be. But I always just find that interesting. And I think that might have been something in the show. I can't remember, though. I really can't. I don't know if it's just that I've read about it so much or that it was there. I'm going to have to rewatch that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the one in the show didn't really have as much complexity to it.
Yeah.
Like she saw Drogo, I remember, with their baby.
Yes. Which
Um,
is interesting, too.
yeah. But so one of the last things I wanted to touch on that I actually really like. So everyone and their mother who is deep into these fan theories has also poured over the identity of Quaithe. The woman who is basically hounding Dany and sending her all these visions. And an important aspect of the books, we've talked about how a lot of people dream in it. Characters can send dreams to people. It's outright stated in the 4th book when Sam gets to the Citadel that the Maesters are using these glass candles to send dreams to people. And then Bran finds out that the Three-Eyed Crow has been sending him dreams. When he was knocked out, we got an entire chapter of him when he was in a coma having a dream sent by Bloodraven. So we have those characters who can send them. I really like the idea that Quaithe is also one of these people who can send dreams. And she's been influencing Daenerys from the get-go. Because a lot of times when Daenerys makes a rash decision, it's after a dream. When she decides, that rather than feeling like a victim to Khal Drogo, that she's going to enjoy horse riding and she's going to enjoy having sex with him and she's going to...
That's I was trying to do...
Yeah.
Okay, now she's the one who tells her all that. Okay.
Right. She has a dream and then all of a sudden becomes bolder and braver. And this is what leads her to, enjoy the Khaleesi lifestyle. Mm-hmm. She has a dream before she decides that she's going to burn the slaver and steal the Unsullied. She has a dream before she decides she's going to stay in Meereen and, not sail to Westeros.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the idea that Quaithe is Ashara Dayne. Because, importantly, someone once asked George Martin if Ashara's body was ever found after she supposedly jumped from this tower. I like the idea that Quaithe might be the real mother of Daenerys.
Okay.
And that she's been watching over her for all of this because she's her mother.
Yeah.
And that's why she keeps saying, remember who you are.
I gotta jump off. My phone's dying.
Okay.
I got 1% battery left.
Well, that was all I wanted to say. I was getting to the wrap-up point. Is there any last thing you wanted to say, Dinez, before we go?
No, it's a lot to think about. It's a lot of new information for me, so...
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and you kind of got to, sit down and sort it out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like you guys have had a head start on the sorting out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for being on, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, my pleasure. Talk to you later.
All right, bye, Dinez.
Bye.
So, Robin, was there anything else you wanted to...
No, I mean, I'm like I said, there's a lot of other theories I didn't know about.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That always happens when I talk to you about Game of Thrones, though, Mike.
And that's the whole reason I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I still tend to think, like I said, I think it's a thing. I don't know.
I for all of this, for all of the discussion and for introducing all the other ideas, I agree. I do still think that R plus L equals J is the answer.
Yeah.
Because it would just be like too bizarre to not be the case.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like sure, it's very George Martin to have like nobody saw it coming, this ending. But I just feel like we consider R plus L equals J to be a foregone conclusion because we have looked through all these things.
Yeah.
But for someone reading it for the first time, they might not even be able to put all those pieces together. Mm-hmm. So it is still a mystery, just because people who read too deeply into it have figured this out doesn't mean that it's like, it's no longer a mystery.
Yeah. And just because it happened on the show now doesn't mean it's going to happen in the book.
That's true. That is very true.
And John could be dead in the books and nobody's going to care anymore. Really.
Right.
Like, that's where we're at in the books, right? Like, John is, he hasn't woken up yet. So,
yeah.
So we'll see,
We will see, but I hope I've at least, demonstrated just how complex it is.
Yep.
And how many layers of this onion there are to peel back.
Sure.
So I'm going to offer it up to the audience. What do you think? Comment below. Tell us if you think that there's any possibility R plus L equals J is not true. And Robin, I want to thank you for being on, the remaining guest.
Yeah. The last one standing.
The last, you sit the throne at this point. And I guess this is signing off from our throne to yours. This is Explain of Thrones.